Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer on the architecture of automating habits. We're diving straight into the science of why we so often struggle to stick with our routines, and more importantly, how we can actually rewire our approach. Look, we all know the frustration of starting really strong and then just fading fast, right? But the underlying biological mechanisms behind why that happens are actually super fascinating. So let's get right into the science of habit formation and figure out how to build systems that literally last.
We have absolutely all been there. You start a new routine on a Monday, best of intentions, but by Thursday, you're completely drained and slipping right back into those old patterns. It's incredibly common to feel this sense of guilt when a habit fails, to think, if I just tried a little harder, this would work. But here's the thing, willpower is not an endless well. It's a finite biological resource. Every single decision you make, every temptation you resist, it chips away at your cognitive battery through something called decision fatigue. When we constantly rely on willpower to just force ourselves to do things, we're actively draining our mental energy. It's not a moral failing at all. It's simply biology running its course.
All right, let's look at Section 1, the willpower problem, a finite resource. Because willpower is a finite resource, relying on sheer effort alone is essentially a guaranteed way to run out of gas. Think of it like trying to hold a heavy weight straight out at arm's length. Eventually, your muscles are going to give out, no matter how badly you want to keep holding it up. That's a short-term strategy. Structured systems, on the other hand, well, those are the actual scaffolding of long-term success. Instead of waking up and trying to sheer force yourself into going for a run, a structured system means laying out your clothes the night before, placing your shoes right by the door, and totally removing the friction of decision-making. If we want to succeed, we have to stop trying to muscle our way through our days and start systematically automating our repetitive actions.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 2, your brain's automatic center, the basal ganglia.
Now, the real anatomical secret to habits is the basal ganglia. You can think of this specific golf ball-sized region deep within the brain as your mind's ultimate efficiency center. See, our brains are incredibly smart and, honestly, inherently lazy. They want to conserve mental energy wherever possible to take the processing load off the conscious mind. Through a really cool process called chunking, your brain takes a sequence of actions and converts them into an automatic routine. As we repeat behaviors, the neurological heavy lifting actually migrates away from the decision-making prefrontal cortex and settles right down into the basal ganglia. Once a behavior moves into this dedicated efficiency center, boom, it's on autopilot. You no longer have to spend your precious finite willpower to execute it.
But how do we actually convince the brain to bundle those actions and move them into the basal ganglia? Well, it requires an internal high five. And this high five, that's dopamine. Dopamine is the absolute primary chemical motivator in your brain. It's the crucial neurochemical signal that tells your nervous system, hey, this is good, let's remember how to do this again. It's not just about the pleasure of the reward itself, it's the powerful craving and anticipation of that reward that drives the behavior over time. Dopamine is literally the reinforcement mechanism the brain uses to stamp in those automatic actions. Without that chemical spike, the habit simply isn't going to stick.
So let's break down how that happens in Section 3, the three-part habit loop, structural mechanics.
Every single habit out there relies on a continuous, three-step behavioral loop. Step 1 is the cue. This is the trigger that kicks off the behavior. Step 2 is the routine, the actual action or behavior itself. And Step 3 is the reward. And yep, that's where our friend dopamine comes in, delivering that internal high five to reinforce the entire process. Consider a really universal example. You feel a sudden spike of stress at work. That's your cue. You open your phone and mindlessly scroll social media. That's the routine. You get a temporary, fleeting distraction from your stress. That's the reward. You need all three of these essential components functioning seamlessly together to establish a loop and eventually hand it off to the basal ganglia. Let's talk timeline. In Section 4, the 66-day rule. Time to automate. When you're building a new habit, patience is absolutely essential because neurological rewiring is a literal, physical process. For decades, there's been this pervasive myth floating around claiming it takes exactly 21 days to form a habit. Well, science shows a very different reality. It takes an average of 66 days for a new tendency to become fully ingrained and automatic. 66 days on average to really forge those neural pathways. And because it's an average, some complex habits can take even longer. This is the realistic timeline for neurological automation to actually take place. So, if you feel like you're struggling a month into a new routine, give yourself some grace. You're simply still in the building phase.
All right, let's test what we've learned in Section 5, the Brain Power Quiz. Let's review.
It's time for a quick check to lock in what we've covered in this explainer. Here's your first challenge. Which chemical acts as the internal high five? I'll give you just a few seconds to lock in your answer. Think back to that primary chemical motivator. 3, 2, 1.
Dopamine. That's right. It's the crucial internal high five your brain absolutely needs to crave that loop again tomorrow.
Okay, moving right along to the next question. How many days does a habit take on average to become completely ingrained? Got your number in mind? Let's see if you're right. 66. Yes, 66 days is the magic average number for true neurological automation. Go ahead and just forget that 21-day myth forever. Let's keep this momentum going. Here is your third challenge. What are the 3 parts of a habit loop? Think back to the structural mechanics we just broke down. What were those 3 consecutive steps? Let's reveal the answer.
The cue, the routine, and the reward. You've got to have all 3 functioning together. If just one drops out, the whole habit loop breaks. Question 4 is a true or false challenge testing your brain anatomy. True or false? Habits move to the basal ganglia. What do you think?
The answer is true. That is our brain's dedicated automatic center, perfectly designed to save you from burning out your mental battery.
And for our final, absolutely crucial question of the quiz, true or false, willpower never runs out. Lock it in.
That is absolutely, emphatically false. Willpower is a limited, totally finite resource. And, honestly, that is the biggest takeaway here. Because our sheer effort will eventually drain, we must rely on building structured systems instead. Which brings us to our final and definitely most important question for you to consider today. Since willpower is finite, what system are you going to build for your next 66 days? Now that you understand the architecture of how your mind automates repetitive actions, you have the actual blueprint. You know about the cue, the routine, the reward, and the amazing power of dopamine to push those actions right into your basal ganglia. So before you start your next endeavor, just take a moment to reflect. How can you remove friction? How can you clearly define your cues? Stop relying on sheer effort alone, give yourself some grace, and intentionally design a system for long-term success. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Now go out there and build something great.